Hey everyone, today I have the pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine, Johnny, that happens to be an attorney working on some pretty fascinating stuff in regards to Web3 and the crypto sector. He is not a crypto lawyer. I just want to throw that out there, but I've asked him to weigh in on some questions that I've raised about previous rulings that surround digital assets, as well as some new developments that have just come about over the past week. So as someone that's never passed the bar myself, but I do speak about, securities and things like that on my channel, I thought it would be a good idea to bring somebody else in that offers a little bit more expertise. So Johnny, thank you so much for joining me today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive in?
Well, thanks for having me. You said I'm not a crypto lawyer. I don't think anyone's a crypto lawyer. I don't even know what that means. I'm not professing any expertise in whether or not cryptocurrencies are securities. Nothing I say here is legal advice. I have dabbled. I do have a couple of clients in the Web3 space. I've done securities. I've worked with the SEC on occasion, not for, but with, to make sure people are compliant. But we're in unexplored territory here, and it's fun to talk about and like conjecture and speculate. But really, this is such a unsettled space that this is strictly entertainment purposes only. But I'm really happy to be here and kind of review some of the things that have happened from like a reporting standpoint and then kind of speculate for fun. I'm happy to do that.
Absolutely. And before we begin, I just want to throw out that none of this that we talk about today and discuss in this conversation should be construed as legal advice or financial advice. And that is very important to understand before we dive into this, because we are just a couple of friends discussing things that we find fascinating in the crypto market.
Great disclaimer, Clay. Now let's give legal advice. That's what financial people do. They go, oh, not financial advice, but we're not going to do
that. Yeah. Before we begin talking about the monumental case that just happened this past week, I want to go back and look at some previous rulings about crypto and securities, because I think that really kind of lays the foundation of where this current SEC administration is at. So let's look at the 2017 ICO craze. What did we learn from that as far as the SEC is concerned? And what about ICOs and the way they're conducted makes them all labeled as securities?
Yeah. So since 2017, and since even before that, Howey has been the standard, the Howey test. Now that's back from 1946. Okay. So they're analyzing whether an investment contract, they're defining it as a contract, transaction, or scheme whereby a person invests their money in a common enterprise. Common enterprise is led to expect profits on the efforts of a promoter or the third party. So you kind of have four prongs in there. And looking at the ICOs, one of the early cases was Telegram. Telegram wanted to, obviously, we think of Telegram, it's just a massive platform. It'd almost be like if Facebook decided to release a digital currency. And we're talking about the hundreds of millions of dollars of market cap at the time. Or I shouldn't say market cap, value or valuation. They essentially hadn't been a platform that hadn't had any profits. Two brothers kind of put in a bunch of millions of dollars into it. It became hugely popular, and they wanted to start monetizing it. And they thought about bringing in this like currency, digital asset into the platform. And what they did is they pre-sold it to investors for hundreds of millions of dollars, that token. And then that with the expectation that they would be able to turn around and sell that token to the public based off what Telegram had developed, how they promoted it, the kind of the roadmap that they had. So what you had was an exchange of money in a common enterprise working together to them relying on the efforts of Telegram to make that happen. And they had the expectation of profit. Boom. That's a security. And they had not, the problem is they did not register that digital asset. And I shouldn't even say that digital asset. They need to register that investment contract, that agreement for the exchange of the digital assets with the SEC. And they didn't. Now, you might be wondering, well, why didn't they? Why'd you just register or make it a security? That really complicates your token quite a bit, because now all of a sudden you're dealing with a security that might lose like its ability to be a currency or be exchanged across Telegram because it's security, and securities have restrictions in how, the KYC, how they're transferred, who's holding them. So that would really complicate and kind of mess up any utility they have. And so there's this kind of fine line. It's like, do we want to get the asset called a security? That, it turns out, wasn't a good way to think about it. As we kind of go down the road and we look at Ripple, and the judge really, Torres, just reemphasizes, it's not about the token. Just like in Howie, it wasn't about the oranges. It's about the totality of the circumstances, everything, like any underlying commodity or asset or agreement is irrelevant. Look at the expectations. If it looks and quacks like an investment contract, it probably is an investment contract. So the ICO smackdown, right? I think it was accurate and an accurate holding of the Howey test, especially at the time when these assets weren't even providing much as far as utility goes.
Yeah.
They were just simply raising money, right?
I agree.
And so, but one of the bad lessons we've kind of come to expect out of that is the token itself a security? And Ripple brings a lot of clarity to that.
Absolutely. And I do agree. I think most of those ICOs kind of did it all in the same way, where they tried to raise funds in order to build something later on that they would issue to the public. But that in itself becomes this investment contract that you're talking about, and dubs it a security because it's building or it's investing off of the work of others. So all of those ICOs, I completely agree that they should have been labeled as securities. But it definitely begs the question of whether or not the tokens themselves are the securities or just that initial investment contract. And that's something that we're going to dive into with this whole XRP debate. The reason that I wanted to bring up all that is because the ruling on the XRP case was a very strange one in many people's minds. Judge Torres, who ruled on the case, chose to label the initial sale of the coin as a security contract, but not the actual coin, XRP itself. So can you explain, maybe from a judge's perspective, why they would choose to look at the coin itself and say, okay, the sales of that are not securities, but the initial sale from Ripple Labs itself is the security?
Well, it's not always a security, but it could be. So the sale isn't what's important. There were several determinations made in Ripple. Now, remember, this is just for one district court, right? Sure. You don't know what another judge is going to think, and they are not bound by what Judge Torres thinks. However, I think Torres makes a pretty cogent analysis, and they analyzed in that case. First of all, they didn't analyze secondary sales between, like, if I sold XRP to you, don't even worry about that. That's not at issue. Okay. What they focused on was the initial institutional sales. That's the sales that Ripple made of XRP to pretty much sophisticated investors that got in early. There was a lockup period. There was the expectation that Ripple was, this started to sound like an ICO, right? Right. There's this expectation that, you would get them early and that you're going to be able to resell them for more based off what the work that Ripple Labs had done. And it effectively functions like an ICO. And so we had this initial sale, the institutional sale, it's called, to the sophisticated investors, was deemed an unregistered security. And it's effectively because it looked and acted like an ICO. But the Judge Torres was really good about saying this same underlying asset, it doesn't matter if it's oranges or tokens or whatever. Let's look at the other ways in which it was sold. In the programmatic sales, the sales of Ripple going in market selling on a decentralized or centralized exchange, right? Probably mostly centralized at that point.
Yeah.
But to individuals who didn't even know that they were buying that token from XRP, right? It wasn't like marketed or promoted by XRP. It was just like, we need to raise funds. Here's this place where we can sell these tokens to raise funds. And those funds, XRP, and this is in the case of selling those programmatic sales to the market, accounted for about 1% of the total market volume of the XRP sales going on. So if I'm out there, I don't know if I'm buying from XRP. What kind of investment contract can there be between an individual who doesn't even know who they're buying a token from, right? You can't really establish it. The expectations, there's nothing concrete there. Like if I go and buy something from an anonymous person, how could we say that's an investment contract? And that's effectively what it was. And so they really focused on that. Taurus really focused on that to say the same thing that was sold to the institutional investors when sold to the programmatic investors is not a security. So that was the big win, right? And that's why everyone was excited. But I mean, remember one court. It's just one court.
Right.
It's okay to be happy about it, but don't go and start making plans about your upcoming token launch because nothing's really settled still, and we could see an appeal on this. Some of the other things that were established in the Ripple case that were really interesting. One, like a token's at payment. So if you're a startup in the blockchain space and you want to create a token and you pay your devs or whoever else for the work they did in tokens, they decided, Taurus decided there's no exchange of money. The exchange of money is one of the elements of the Howey test, and there just simply is no exchange of money.
Right.
So the Taurus found that there was no security relationship, which is an interesting takeaway, and perhaps gives some people some ideas about, okay, so if I airdrop my token, like there's no exchange of money there. Okay, well, maybe there's a point there. We'll see. Taurus didn't really give an analysis of the airdrops to my understanding, but that's shed some light on that. The other big thing and the implications of this from a civil procedure perspective are kind of interesting, is they analyzed whether or not, the payments to the founder and the CEO, multi-million-dollar value of XRP given to them that they market sold, determined that that's not necessarily a security. However, remember the institutional sales that were an unregistered security? How involved, should the CEO and founder be liable for that sale, for doing that? Okay,
right.
Personally. And this is something that founders and you need to be aware of. Like, you're not, if you're involved in illicit sales of securities, you could be found personally liable, right? And that
like in that specific regard, they're going to be okay because they made $600 million off of the sale of their own coin. But the majority of founders out there don't have that luxury, right? I'd say 99% of founders out there will never make that kind of money off of the sale of their own coin. So this is something to be very wary of. Like, you can't just depend on that, because they will probably get slapped on the wrist with a massive fine that they'll be able to pay for. But the majority of people would never be able to pay for a fine that they're probably going to receive for that.
Right. And we'll see, if the court tailors the damages for how much they bet the windfall they fell into. I promise you, those guys are going to fall on their feet. They're going to be okay. Even if the court takes all of their XRP money, I think they'll be able to swing it. But yeah, there's going to be a trial on that. So what we had procedurally, this motion was a motion for summary, cross motion for summary judgment. Summary judgment means hey, court, we got all the facts we need. We don't need a jury. A jury is the fact finder. They establish the facts. The judge applies the laws. And we say, and both sides were saying, we got all the facts we need, judge. We win. Let me show you why. And at the end of the day, whether or not those individual founders, CEO, be held personally liable, kind of depended on stuff. There's an issue of fact here, and so we need to go to trial. So what that does is it precludes a final judgment. Like a final judgment's when you have a bow and you can just like every issue that's been raised is now settled, put it in the record, final judgment. You have an appeal after a final judgment. You can do an interlocutory appeal, which means like we're going to appeal these issues, even though we still have to figure out these issues. There's some requirements that you need to satisfy to do that. What it does is it gives the SEC some time to think about that appeal. And I think you just told me like they've signaled that they're interested in an appeal. We can get into that. But that goes to say like Ripple's huge. There's a lot of interesting things to talk about arising from it, but it's still as unsettled as it was the day before Ripple as far as advising and thinking about how we should start thinking about this stuff.
Right. You have a lot of colleagues that are lawyers that, you know, have been doing this for a while. And some of them, you've told me personally that some of them refuse to go into very niche things when it comes to Web3 because of the lack of clarity on that. Also, yeah, I do think that we should discuss a little bit about the SEC's response to this court case, because it does appear like they're looking to appeal with the verbiage that they're coming out with in their response. They said that they believe the judge got it wrong, that XRP should be labeled a security. So just kind of weigh in on that for us.
Yeah. So let's think about this. If you're the SEC, okay, you've got one very unfavorable ruling. Like the SEC's charge is to protect your main street investor, right? More than anything. And what we have in this outcome is the sophisticated investor is actually being held accountable, while the main street investor is kind of has a lesser standard, right? They can buy these risky assets. And so you're thinking like, do we want, but on the other hand, you got to pay win, right? You're holding the main institutional sale accountable, right? So do you want to risk appealing and going up to a higher court where they affirm the lower courts and perhaps reverse your institutional sale, which I don't think is likely, but like, do you want to risk creating precedent building off of Ripple? I don't think you really do. I think you want to just take the win there and pivot and just focus on Coinbase and get a home run on Coinbase. So like I said, they have some time to kind of make that decision. I don't see a lot of benefit in appealing. However, in this, they've made representations that they will appeal in the context of Do Kwon's case, because Do Kwon's pointing to Ripple now to say, as you point out to me, hey, look, this isn't actually security. What are you doing? Get off my back. And Do Kwon's got other issues. I don't know. I don't know if he's paying for these legal fees out of the legendary.
Oh yeah, he is.
Yeah,
dude,
Ledger
spent like $19 million already on legal fees.
Yeah, that's our money. But yeah, our money that has been smuggled around the world. So what's interesting though is in that case, the SEC statement was like, so the SEC has misconstrued other rulings to other courts. And that's what I find baffling. It's like, so in the LBRY case, they went into Coinbase and essentially construed that LBRY said that any sale, even secondary sales, could qualify as securities. LBRY never said that. And actually in the most recent opinion by the court, they made very clear, like, I never said that.
So, I saw that.
Coinbase could come back and be like, yo, you're misrepresenting this to the court. And I don't think they will. But the other case of this is in the Do Kwon kind of statement, they're like, look, we have this mess where we have two standards, one for the programmatic, one for the institutional. That's not tenable. That's not true. Like, we have one standard, the Howey test. And it applies differently based off the totality of the circumstances. And they know that they're sophisticated attorneys. For them to roll out this, there's two standards now, is nonsense and really kind of disconcerting. Like, why would you have attorneys acting like that who are supposed to be protecting the interests of the public?
Yeah.
Let's be honest and be truthful. Let's start creating some regulation by policy and rule rather than enforcement. How about that instead of this marketing campaign? Anyways.
No, that kind of leads into another question that I had for you, because it does appear like Gary Gensler and the SEC are taking a very hard stance against crypto, and it almost seems personal at this point for Gary. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's him taking a personal stance and leading his SEC to charge all of these startups with securities fraud and things like that? Or do you think that it may be something else entirely?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Part of it, as I think, it's like I have conspiracies about this, but the other, first of all, like when you're an attorney on a cause, he's not an attorney, but like in my case, I've taken on clients to where before I took the case, like years ago, I might have thought a certain thing about what the outcome should be and whether or not that's fair. But once you dig into the trenches for a cause, for an individual, you get blinders and you are like, this is the way it should be. That judge, they're biased against me every time that it doesn't work out. Opposing counsel's out of their mind. This is so unfair. There is this tendency to just be biased, and he may just be in this personal rut of like, all these people are bad guys. You gotta remember, like, he got burned by Sam Bankman-Fried, right?
Right.
If you had taken, like, been working with someone who was like a former student, maybe, like, this person, and they turn out to be the biggest fraud in crypto history, effectively.
Yeah.
You're going to start acting with a chip on your shoulder. You got a lot of egg in your face, right? So not to use too many idioms, but so I think there's a little bit of that. Obviously, he's in the political hot seat, having racked up some losses. However, I also think the framework with it, like, people like to pull up his old videos from MIT, but look, you didn't used to think this way. And a lot of his statements, like when you push him, like, is Ethereum a security? And he gets kind of dodgy and like, which I think is somewhat fair, because the Ethereum itself, like, was the issuance of the residual issuance a security? That's a different conversation.
But that's actually a great question, though, right? Because, like, it's obviously outside of the statute of limitations now, but we could say the same thing almost about, and this is a question I had for you earlier that I was thinking about. So XRP had that initial sale to institutional investors, and they labeled that as the securities contract. But
investment contract, yeah.
Investment contract, I'm sorry. Thank you. So if they were to take them to court today, that would be outside of the statute of limitations. So how exactly does that work, though? If, like, the ruling doesn't come down until now, but they sued them in 2020. So is it?
Yeah, so it's that once you bring the action, it tolls, like, you're in, right? You got your foot in the door before it. And there's also something called tolling, where, like, a good example of tolling, not to be political, but Trump's charges in New York against him are really old charges, and he's going to bring a statute of limitation. These are the fraud charges in the state, New York. And he'll bring an argument that, like, the statute of limitations is over, and the prosecutor's going to say, yeah, no, it's not, because there are certain things that pause that timer. You're setting a timer for 6 years. If he leaves the state, we'll stop it. When he comes back, we'll start it again. So in the same token, like, not to say token, they could make some sort of argument that, it was told feasibly they could survive the statute of limitations argument. But once the action's brought, then the statute of limitations issue is over, and that's like a civil procedure issue. But it's like, to get back to what I was saying about my conspiracy theory, I do think that Gensler is operating with a framework of cryptocurrency presents a threat to the United States economy and even national security to an extent. I think that's his directive from the executive branch is look, we've got millions of dollars of value leaving the United States to North Korea or other hackers. We are starting, a good portion of our young population is holding significant amounts of their net worth in a cryptocurrency that would be subject to foreign manipulation of that market. We don't want to get rugged. Like, you have to think about like the stability of your nation starting to wean off the strongest, most stable asset, the US dollar. I know people have their issues with it, but like it's not the gold back, but it's the gold standard in currency outside of gold.
Yeah.
Why would you want to have your population get away from that and get into this other currency that's subject to manipulation? You're watching just capital just flow out of the country. That's why China did their crackdown initially. It's like, we got to keep our capital here, right? And so he's operating from not just a strictly apply the rules of the SEC to and the law to token issuances. I think he thinks he's like kind of the zealous kind of protect the country, protect our economy, and get all these scammers out of here and get and stop North Korean hackers from stealing all of our capital. And so if that's your directive, right, you start throwing things at the wall at some point and you start not making sense sometimes. And I think that is part of the reason why he doesn't care about some of the PR. He's just like, go, 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 go. I have this higher goal here.
Yeah.
And if you think about him and put him in that, all of that, plus the SBF stuff, like, you're going to get someone's motives. It's going to look weird from the outside unless you try to put yourself in their shoes. And I think that's kind of what's going on.
But don't you think it's a little strange that like all of these lawsuits have occurred to people that I believe personally are genuinely trying to do the right thing in crypto and abide by the rules and they're honest, they're doing honest work, but yet all of these scams that have occurred, BitConnect, OneCoin, like SBF and his exchange, like all of these things, Terra Luna, like could have been caught early on. And
it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to catch someone like SBF specifically is just it's such a rare thing. The situation of SBF, like you compare him to like the other big scammers. What's his name?
Do Kwon.
No, the IRL Ponzi scheme guy. Bernie Madoff.
And gotcha.
Really, it's such a unique thing. It was happening right in front of Gary, like right in front of him. But when you think back, we were all just like, oh yeah, look at this idiot. Like look at this guy. Like, I'm not a judge by its cover kind of guy, but like,
look at him.
And for some people, like, it did set off. Yeah, Elon alleges that like it set off his like sus radar, that this like kid just shows up and he just seems like, Wonder Boy. We should have seen that coming, right? Like,
yeah,
but it just kind of happens. And that's why I think regulation is needed in this space. Like, if we had regulation, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. Like,
yeah,
you just couldn't have gotten away with it because people would have seen into your books and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that is a great point. And I'm glad that you brought that up because a few of the House committees actually drafted a bill that was announced this week that I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit. Now, I've read the entire thing. I know that you haven't, and you have your reasons for that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it's kind of fascinating because things like FTX, had there been this legislation here, I think never would have happened, because you dive into the bill itself and it talks specifically about the record keeping that is required for exchanges. Now, they don't label them as exchanges. They label them as, what is it? It is digital commodity broker dealers is how they label exchanges in the legal sense. And if you dive into this bill, which is very crypto friendly, I believe, which is why it will never pass in the House. But if you dive into it, it's super interesting how they are taking a stance of looking at the consumers themselves and saying, okay, if you want to be an exchange here in the United States, you have to have amazing record keeping. You have to be able to prove that to this committee. And on top of that, consumer funds are never to be touched. If a consumer, exactly, 100% of consumer funds will remain as consumer funds in your reserves. So like, they're allowed to do whatever they want with the profits from the exchange, but consumer funds are never to be touched. And
Binance is we're going to find that Binance probably did a lot of the same things that FTX did. We may find that, like, there were allegations in the Binance case of commingling funds and shuffling money between Binance and subsidiaries held by CZ. Like, we might find that if you don't have that rule, and you do have that rule, and the reasons the SEC is bringing that is predicated on the fact that those 5 coins that are listed as securities, if you can establish that this person was a broker dealer of securities, then you can apply all the rules that already exist to broker dealers related to securities, right? And what this legislation does is, we're not calling them securities, but you still need to act like you're holding securities effectively. Right. And there's several bills. Cinema has one. There's a couple bipartisan ones. There's some that are kind of like narrowly tailored to like focus just on the tax issue or the money laundering issues. But there are 2 or 3 more comprehensive ones, and I haven't synthesized all of them or done a side-by-side analysis. I'm actually thinking about doing that. But
that would be cool.
The sad thing is this recent one, the one you like, it's the first one that I know of that is, and maybe there is one on the Democrat side, but it's only Republican sponsors. And what makes me nervous is that I don't want this to be a political issue.
Right.
We have to have a bipartisan consensus, and we have to get it done like soon, because there are already the broker dealer definition. There's something in the Jobs Act that's going into effect in 2024 that kind of redefines that. That will have drastic impact on the crypto community. It would mean that like DeFi exchanges or bridges or like miners, like miners, not miners. But it would redefine it to capture all of those, right? And that would just wreak havoc on the industry. So we need to come up with some comprehensive legislation, like.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because all of those definitions are actually defined in this bill as well. And it basically talks about the term decentralized. So if something is decentralized, then it is upheld by governance of like some sort of DAO or something along those lines, but it's not controlled by a single entity or person. And that I thought was fascinating in this bill, because they genuinely are trying to not over-regulate, but do it in a way that is friendly and doesn't stifle innovation, but also in an understanding way of saying, okay, we get what is trying to be built here, and we want to make sure that we're still protecting consumers in a way that, if it is a governance model and decentralized, then we're totally cool with that. But what we're not okay with is if somebody tries to label something as decentralized and it isn't that. That is whenever it's not okay. And the bill talks all about that. It's pretty amazing stuff. They also talk about decentralized exchanges. They talk about miners. So all of those things that you just listed are actually in the bill. And it would provide a lot more clarity on that. Yes, the Jobs Act kind of talks about the broker-dealer relationship, but I think that could probably go hand in hand with a bill like this that kind of breaks it down a little bit further.
Yeah. And what's really important is so LBRY and Ripple both failed to make a critical argument that Coinbase is making, and that's the major questions doctrine. And essentially they're coming out and saying, Coinbase, their big PR point is hey, you never gave us clarity. We asked for clarity. You never gave us clarity. Right. Well, actually, one of the other decisions in Ripple was they don't have to give you clarity. Howie's Howie. You need no fair notice. But part of that is, okay, you don't even have the authority to tell us what to do with digital assets. That is beyond the scope of your power as a agency, administration branch agency. And so the major questions doctrine says you need directives from Congress to lay this out for you. And it's a good argument, I think, because digital assets are so different than what we think of stocks as securities. There's all sorts of other ones, but it's so different in that it's this transferable, transparent asset that could have utility, could be used as a commodity. It's not what we think of as strictly, it's a new asset class, right? And for the SEC to go in waiving the Howey test at this new asset test or asset class has created just chaos, right? To the point where, like you pointed out, attorneys don't even want to touch the stuff anymore, and they don't even want to give you a written formal opinion as to whether or not your asset is a security, because one, that might end up being discoverable in a lawsuit down the line, and two, it might subject them to some sort of professional liability. So it's we should be looking to Congress, right? And Congress, if we had a functioning government that wasn't just locked in gridlock perpetually, right? They would have solved this for us like other countries have. And so if you are a startup looking to launch a token, the cases are going to tie you in knots, right? And until we have something at the appeal or the Supreme Court level, there really doesn't matter what these district courts are saying. What we need to start looking to is this legislation, and being advocates for legislation is not being nihilists about, the government bad. You can't do anything. They aren't experts. They are experts. They actually do very much know what they're talking about. Maybe that's some individual senator, but the people creating this legislation do know what they're talking about. I promise you, probably more than us, or definitely more than us. And so I'm excited to see what they put together. And I hope that people can organize and get behind good ideas that are nonpartisan. They don't even have anything to do with who your favorite candidate is. It's just about, okay, there's this new asset class. The world's going to adopt it, and we need to be part of that. And hopefully that's what happens.
Yeah, man.
I will hold my breath.
I completely agree. Obviously, I do believe that there are people on one side of the aisle that are more in favor of crypto than the other, but I do believe that it needs to be a partisan or a nonpartisan issue because, it won't pass if it isn't. So we absolutely need crypto legislation and clarity on a lot of these different things. And we're not going to get that if it's just a partisan issue.
I agree. And I'm not going to say, you kind of suggested that Republicans are more crypto friendly. I do think there are some Democrats who are willing to play ball. One candidate is already said they're very supportive for president. I don't know how far they'll go. There are some state or some Congress members who have come on and kind of praised Judge Torres and kind of gave Gary Gensler a little scolding. So we'll see. I'm not totally pessimistic. I think what you'll find is that when you do have bipartisan consensus, I don't want it to be behind the lobbying efforts of the traditional TradFi big finance players creating a landscape for themselves.
Exactly.
I hope it can be, think of like AOC meets Ted Cruz. I know it's the worst thing, right? Both.
Yeah, the worst of both.
But like AOC is like for the people, or Bernie Sanders like for the people, no corporate cronyism controlling this, and Ted Cruz being kind of like, let's be open, free market. It kind of meet in the middle, right?
Yeah.
That would be a beautiful thing, instead of just handing the keys over, like as we see in like, even like say cannabis, right? Illegal, bad. As soon as it's legal, Marlboro comes in and controls the whole market or something like that. Like we can't have that kind of situation where TradFi just takes over the crypto and destroys the values and ethos underlying it. But that, I think, that's, we'll see. We'll see.
So one last thing that I have for you is I'd like to know what you are most excited about in the Web3 industry as a lawyer.
Yeah, I think the new applications of in the utility and the innovation, when you have that pressure, that confusion, it creates innovation and people being more, okay, well, we can't sell it. We'll airdrop it, or we'll, like these. I'm excited to see what comes out of this like pressure cooker that we're in right now. One of the cool things that has come out, and you talked about this legislation kind of defining decentralized and things like that, is like crypto adjacent innovation, which DAOs are now being formally recognized in several states, and they have really good language around what does decentralization mean, and what that brings is a new form of democratic governance, decentralized governments to any entity, right? Any business. And so we're starting to see that ripple effect out into the Web2 world or the legal world of DAOs and governance, and what does it mean to be part of not just a financial system that's decentralized, but a governance structure that's decentralized. I think that's going to make big waves. And I'm excited to kind of be a part of that in my practice and helping people organize that and think about that. That's one thing I'm really excited for.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me today. I really do appreciate your time. I know that you are a very busy man. So thank you so much for talking and giving all of this insight to those that might watch this and say, hey, these are some good ideas. These are some things that I could think about and ponder on. So thank you so much for that, Johnny.
Thanks for having me. And my last words are nothing in this program. Well, it's legal advice. If you will need legal advice, seek out an attorney, get under contract. This is entertainment, speculation, and fun only.
Thanks. Exactly.